People who grew up with wealth, what was your I'm privileged wake-up call? When I was confused about people on Maury complaining their spouse was at the club, and I couldn't figure out what type of country club would let people like that through the front security gate. At this point I already knew I was very well off, but after I had gotten laid off for the first time a few years ago I took a break for about a month before diving into a job search. I was at the self-checkout at the grocery store next to a woman paying with food stamps. I had recently gotten $100,000 from my grandmother's inheritance and it hit me I'm unemployed, not even trying to find a job, and I just got a boatload of money because somebody else died. And she's the one people think is the freeloader. My parents are wealthy, but I grew up in a place where many of my peers' parents were super duper crazy wealthy, so I had a really skewed understanding of wealth. It was really eye-opening for me when I went to college. I didn't have to take out student loans, my parents were able to just pay for it, but I had friends who even with financial aid had to work their butts off year-round to cover the cost of school. I realized pretty quickly just how privileged I was and that I did in fact grow up with wealth. I took my friend to my parents' cabin and he said, "Wow, this is nicer than my house." Becoming an adult and realizing that I have extremely good role models as parents because when they have disagreements they talk them out and I have never ever heard them argue or badmouth each other. I also realized that as a kid my parents got me mental health help that I needed even though it was expensive and continued that care for as long as I have needed it. A third one that doesn't seem like much but has had a huge impact was being taught financial literacy from a young age to budget my money and only buy the things I really want. When I was a kid my best friend came to our house for the first time. He kept saying wow. He was really impressed that we had 2 TVs, it embarrassed me enough that I didn't tell him we had 4. I don't really come from wealth, just solidly upper middle class, but as part of my job I do home visits, and have many clients who are poor. When I first started my career in my 20s, I was shocked to discover there were people in the US who lived in homes with no indoor plumbing or electricity, with dirt floors, or had outdoor kitchens, not like a barbecue setup, like there was no kitchen inside where they lived, so they had to cook on an oiled drum outside. I had no idea. Every summer, I went to 8 weeks of overnight camp, or some other cool summer program, 30-day bus tour across western US. 3 weeks in Australia. I had no idea what those cost at the time. I was gonna say I realized how privileged I was when I spent a summer with my great-grandmother in a small village in rural Hungary. No indoor running water, the only phone was at the church, and everyone came out to touch the rental car we drove there in. This was in the late 1980s. But after reading some of the comments on here, I feel poor again, lol. I did not grow up wealthy. We were a single-income household and my dad made like 30k most of my childhood, 1990s. That's decent in the 90s but there were several of us kids. However, my grandparents are very wealthy. My dad worked for them. But, they just didn't pay him well. I work in finance, and I've seen their old pay stubs, so I know. My grandfather was just an old fart anyways. Good man, but old-fashioned and wouldn't pay for shit. Anyways, it dawned on me how wealthy my family was when I started looking for a real job about 15 years ago. I had worked multiple jobs because my parents were like if you want a phone and car, etc. you are on your own. I was talking to my pops about getting my finance degree. A week later, one of the wealthiest men in the area that owns several businesses called me. He's like, "Your pops said you're studying finance. We're hiring in 20 company. Send your resume to my secretary." Then my pops called and said, "Hey, I heard you got a job at 20. I hadn't even sent the resume. I didn't know my pops knew him. After that, I thought about many little occurrences over my life. Although I was never given money directly from my parents or grandparents, they opened doors for me. I talked to my dad about it a couple years ago. He said I've recently inherited more money than I'll ever need. Your pops always told me to live life like I'll never inherit a penny, and I encourage you to act the same. Many folks are given money and have no skills to manage it. We wanted to give you the skills in case you are given money. I personally was not wealthy, but I have definitely been privileged. I have an uncle who has money. I was a wild madman as a kid, had a lot of psychological stuff going on and had lots of legal issues from the time I was really young, from 11 onwards. I spent about 10 years going in and out of juvies and jails and had a bunch of court cases. Every time I was in court, I had a private lawyer. And these lawyers would fight for me. You could not violate my rights because my lawyer would make a scene about it. You could not attempt to intimidate me into a plea deal, regardless of whether I even did something or if it was one of the cases where I was falsely accused, because my lawyers would fight right back and challenge the prosecutor to take it to trial, and then the prosecutor would generally give up because they knew that they couldn't actually prove that particular allegation. The reason that I didn't end up in prison, despite my various attempts to, is because of the lawyers. My uncle also paid a lot of money to get me into treatment programs/rehab, put me into a really good school, got me counselors, got me everything I needed, and he saved my life, and I turned out to be just a normal, chill person by my early 20s. I met so many people in the system who will never have any of that, people who need help and who will never receive it. The system does nothing in terms of root causes of criminality, it does nothing to prevent recidivism. It does nothing. Court is nothing but a chess game on a conveyor belt, and people get screwed over every day. I'd also like to point out that I'm not disparaging public defenders. There are many passionate public defenders who do excellent work, but their caseloads are too damn big. They cannot allocate endless time to a person's case because they don't have the time. Public defense needs way more funding than it gets. Answering for my privileged 14-year-old daughter, we are most definitely not wealthy, just okay day to day, when she arrogantly corrected a friend that Spotify doesn't have ads. When I went to my husband's parents' house for the first time, after dinner the mom wheeled in a dishwasher and hooked it up to the kitchen faucet. I'd never seen nor heard of this type of dishwasher. My parents loved to travel. By the time I was 16 I had been to every continent aside from Antarctica. I didn't realize that this was privileged behavior until I went to uni, and most of the guys I met had never left the country. In fact, I grew up thinking I was less privileged because everyone at my school was just obscenely rich. Like all their stuff was high-end designer stuff while I was in Converse. There are more rich MFs on Reddit with multiple houses and cabins on a lake than I would have guessed. When I saw how big my friends' bedrooms were. Edit, anyone else have an intercom? Growing up in 70s and 80s. I feel more broke than never reading this thread. Who let me do this? Lol. When I met my wife we were in high school. We were both involved in marching band, and the band takes a trip out of state every 2 years. My senior year the trip was to Washington, D.C. Even though it was a school-sponsored trip, you still had to pay a fee to go. The fee was $1,200. That covered the whole trip as far as room and board, airfare, bus rentals. Pretty much everything except if you wanted to buy personal stuff. You could make like 6 payments or something to make it more affordable for folks. I remember my mom just wrote me a $1,200 check like it was nothing. When talking to my wife, she wasn't even my girlfriend at the time, just a cute girl with a big booty. She was saying she didn't even know if she could go because $1,200 is a lot of money. I was like, just have your parents write a check. Easy. She looked and was like, oh yeah, my parents don't just have $1,200 to drop like that. Turns out a lot of other parents didn't either. When the paid up list came up, only me and maybe 2 other kids were fully paid up by the time the first payment was due. There's other things, but that's one that sticks in my brain. I had no idea this girl I was talking to was gonna be my wife, which is cool too. I married me the cute girl with a big booty and we're poor together. When I learned that not everyone has a summer cottage or trust fund, and not all grandparents have weekend and summer homes. When I realized that some of my friends only had part-time maids, not full-time live-in maids. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.